All right. Are you serious? We're so glad to have you here today. Folks, I have my good friend Charles from Noble Gold. He is here today. And what a day to really bring him on. What a day with the stock market breaking an all-time record, breaking that ceiling of 23,000. Charles, did you ever think you would see this?
I didn't think I'd see it this quick. It made a very big jump from 22,000 to 23,000. Very surprised.
And I guess the first thing people got to say is it real? And or is it going to 25,000 in the next year, year and a half? Or are we going to readjust and fall maybe down to 21?
Very hard to say. And you know, anytime you see a big move like that, you know that there has to be some correction involved. There'll be a pullback. Whether it's a pullback of substantial size like we typically see in the market every 8 to 10 years, and we are in that number. I mean, we're 9 years into this drastic bull market. It's very hard to say. You know, the biggest concern for me is that we see this sluggish U.S. economy still. So that kind of throws me off when I see that kind of a number on the stock market. Because what we do know is sales aren't fantastic for companies right now. So it's a little disconcerting for me. I don't see the strength behind that market, and that's what always worries me when I see moves that I can't justify, that don't make sense.
Yeah, you know, I remember back in the 90s, and I was working in a corporation that was a company that was thinking about doing an IPO, and it was during the dot-com days, and all these, you know, dot-com companies were launching IPOs, but they were based on potential, not on performance. Not on profit or performance, which is, you know, normally what you want to gauge it on. And I kept saying to myself, this thing's a bubble. It's going to bust. It's going to bust because when finally the rubber meets the road, you got to be profitable. Isn't that correct?
Absolutely. Absolutely. If you're not making money, you can't stay in business.
So, okay, so we've got this unbelievable ride, and I think Donald Trump, you know, thumbs up to him. I think he's standing on top of the hill right now saying, I told you guys, if we deregulate, cut some of the bureaucracy and the you know, cut the EPA back, that certainly probably the energy industry would see a jump. Do you think that has anything to do with it?
It does, and I think you know the programs to bring jobs back into America, that's going to help too, and that's why this whole tax plan is so important. Those who follow it understand it. Those who don't may not understand why it's such a big deal, but you got to have business come back so that we all can get better jobs. We can all make more money. And the only way they'll do that is if there's a tax benefit for them.
Yeah, I mean,
businesses need to see the ability to make additional funds or have their funds put to better use. So that tax incentive is a very important thing.
Yeah, I mean, you're right, because if the tax bracket that a company at the end of the year realizes that they're going to have to pay X amount of dollars in taxes, they got to keep a certain amount of cash flow in reserve to meet the tax meet. And that could and will hamper their capital investment to grow their business. Because you can grow yourself out of business. I've seen that happen. Where
it does happen.
You know?
It sounds ridiculous, but it happens.
Yeah, I mean, so if you don't have enough cash flow to maintain the customer base you've acquired, you can grow yourself right out of business, especially if the taxes are too high, which, you know, the taxes don't care what your cash flow problems are. I mean, the government don't care about that. So taxes is huge. So do you think, speaking about taxes, Charles, do you think that President Trump, I mean, he was talking with Mitch McConnell yesterday and they were friends again. I mean, is it possible that this tax plan might go through?
I think it is. I think you're going to see both sides come together because the Republicans are going to have to give a little to make the Democrats jump on board. But I think everyone understands when they're looking at the economics of it, there needs to be some form of incentive. You know, it's important because, you know, we talked about the stock market. You know, that all-time high, they don't want to have happen again is for it to correct by half again, which is always a real possibility if you don't have the numbers. The stock market moved a lot based on the assumption that these things would happen. If they don't, it will correct. Natural corrections are still in place, but you'll have the added pressure of the assumption of growth gone as well. And that's when things get really, really hairy, because you could see this market, going half again. And we, unfortunately, when I say we, I'm talking about the Fed, but we as the United States, the Federal Reserve doesn't have the same tools anymore to help fight it like the last time. They're still holding their balance sheet with $4 trillion on there, and we have no room in the interest rate to really lower it very far. So your basic tools you use to try to offset that kind of economic disturbance are not there. So we really have to make sure that the tax plan goes through. Obamacare needs to be discussed as well. These companies that having to pay more for insurance for their employees now, that takes a toll. So all these things need to really happen so that these companies can go back to profitable, and we can help offset a drastic reduction in the value of the stock market.
Now when you talk about Obamacare, and I'm glad you bring it up, because that's, they tried to do repeal and replace of Obamacare early in the spring, and they kept saying, we got to fix Obamacare first, because that's 1/6 of the entire gross national product. But if we don't fix that first, then we can't get taxes reform fixed, because it's too big of a nugget over here. But it looks so. But can they still do tax reform and then go back and deal with Obamacare?
They have to, unfortunately. And the way to do it was to deal with the healthcare issue first, because it is so significant, and it's an immediate cost on companies. Taxes are great; you'll get a benefit at the end of the year, but that healthcare bill is every month.
Yeah,
companies are paying for their employees every month, and those who don't have company coverage are paying additional amounts every month. So really, they did want to get that done first, and that was the correct way to do it. But since there is such resistance, and we those who promised that they would do this aren't keeping their word, the president has to go on and say, okay, what's the next best thing that I can do? And that is taxes.
Yeah, and I agree that if he does a major tax adjustment, especially for the middle class and small businesses, and then of course everybody and I'm talking about big corporations too. They got to have a tax break too, all the way down. Everybody's got to have a tax break. If that happens, then I think that will fuel the economy. That people, especially small businesses, they will reinvest. They'll hire more people, and then you got to tackle Obamacare, because it's going to implode.
You have to.
And it's to the point now, Charles, that people can't afford the premiums. And the deductibles are out of this world, so it's over. I mean, they're just going to walk away from health care. They're just going to walk away, which you can't do that,
Right. The penalty is going to be less expensive than the policy. It's not a good option.
No, because you pay the penalty, you still don't have health care, so it's really a tax, and that's what John Roberts said, the Supreme Court justice, when the Obamacare bill first showed up on the Supreme Court's desk. They said, well, it's really a tax, so we're going to say it's constitutionally illegal. Well, here we are today, and this thing was front-loaded. Let's be honest, Obama put all the bad stuff in the end. He knew exactly when to drop it on the next president, and so this is a disaster in the making if something doesn't happen soon. As Christians, and I know you as a Christian company, and we truly appreciate you supporting our ministry. It's just so vital, getting people to Christ and showing them the way. Along the way, people also, though, have apprehension. Apprehension, Charles, of, what are they going to do? I mean, a lot of folks have worked their whole life. They've paid into the 401k, and they're getting ready to retire, and they're wondering, what do they do? Do they roll their 401k into an IRA? Do they diversify it? Do they just pull it all out in cash and set it in a bank with no interest? Because there is no interest, or do they roll some of it into precious metals, or do they diversify and kind of spread it around? I mean, can you help us out here with this?
Absolutely. Diversity is important. Even in the best of times, you should be diversified. 5 to 30% of your assets should be in a tangible asset like precious metals. They offer that hedge against what happens in the stock market when you see rallies like this and when it corrects. Because as we get to the point where we want to start using that retirement account, we need it to be stable. We're not looking for the wild growth. We're looking for security. And that's the important thing. That's what diversity offers you. You get stability. You have an insurance on that stock market that can rise, 1,000 points in the blink of an eye, because anything that goes up that fast will come down that fast. So you get that diversity there, and you keep yourself protected. We don't want, and I heard too many stories, in 2007 of people who are right there ready to retire, and they lost half, and retirement wasn't a possibility anymore. And that's heartbreaking. No one wants to be there. So you get diversified. I'm not saying run away from the entire stock market, but for the time being, with it being at all-time highs like this, that old adage, buy low, sell high, it's time to get some of that profit locked in and put yourself on the sideline for a little bit.
Now, can you do that? And for the folks that are out there listening, I know that if you have a 401k, some of you that are still working, you're still paying into your 401k, you can't pull that out to after you're 59 and a half, I think it is, without a penalty. So, Charles, but you can you roll it into precious metals without a penalty? I mean, can you help people understand that?
If your company will allow you, if you're under the age of 59 and a half, there's a chance that you can move it over. And it can be done without taxes, because you're not taking it out. You're not putting that money in your pocket. You're going to move it from that 401k to a self-directed IRA. So it's still a retirement account. But the difference is you now can decide how those funds are invested. And that's a great option. Most of us, we look at our 401k plan and we have a couple choices. And none of them really look that different from one another. So it's kind of hard to say I'm protected in that 401k. I appreciate the tax benefit. I get why it's good to do it. You get that pre-tax investment, so you're not paying taxes on those money. But you need some choices too. So if you have the ability to have that deduction originally, where you're not paying taxes on that income, but then you at a certain point in time can convert it over to a self-directed IRA and now have options, that's a great way to go.
Charles, I was thinking about this a lot, because sometimes people have a misunderstanding when it comes to precious metals, gold and silver. And I've heard this in the 33 years of ministry. There's scripture where it talks about in a certain time, they'll throw their gold in the street because there's no food. I mean, there's just no food. What good is gold and silver if there's nothing to eat? But that's, of course, we're talking about a time during the really, really in the wrath of God. But I looked at what it said when the children of Israel left Egypt. The Lord reminded me the other day, he said, remember when they left Egypt? There was tons of food in Egypt, but God didn't say grab the food. He said grab all of the precious metals. You've been a slave for 400 years. When you leave Egypt, I'm going to take you out of there with a great substance. Get the gold, get the silver, get the jewels, take all the precious metals. And so they took all this gold, and they're going into the middle of a wilderness. Now, you can't eat gold and silver, Charles. You can't eat it.
Yeah.
But God knew that he was going to feed them manna anyway. He was going to provide for them the nourishment they needed. He wanted to make sure they had the substance to sustain them when they got into Canaan. So this was a serious transfer of wealth, if you will, that took place that day. So there is precedent there, and I think the reason is because normally precious metals don't really lose value. They can go down a little, but they don't usually go far, and they do continue to go up historically.
Absolutely, and that's the thing. Most people don't. They look at metals and they see the price of it. It's not what really you want to look at. You want to look at what it does for you. If you look at, let's take gold for example. In 1964, when the Mustangs first came out, if you had 20 ounces of gold, you could buy a brand new Mustang. You know what? Today, if you had 20 ounces of gold, you could still buy a brand new Mustang. It holds its value.
Wow. I guess you're right. So in other words, the price goes up, but it goes up in comparison to your buying power. But the dollar doesn't do that. The dollar doesn't have the same buying power it did years ago.
We have a built-in, what the Fed says is good, we have a built-in 2% inflation. And that means that you and I will lose 78% of our purchasing power over the course of our life.
Wow, that's horrible.
It works out. And it's built that way on purpose.
Is that to keep the little guy down and he just can never crawl out of the hole? Or what is this? You're talking about a world system here. I mean, what about the New World Order, Charles? What is the Illuminati, the New World Order? Are they going to continue to keep us down?
Here's why they do that. And it effectively does keep us down. So for those who are looking for the control, it works for that. But more importantly, when they create programs, they borrow money to do it. And if you look at how they repay it over the long period of time, that cost is substantially less towards the end because that currency has devalued so much, it doesn't feel like it was as much money to build that project.
Wow.
Because it loses that purchasing power that dollar does. So you're not spending $100 million, today's money. If you play that out over 30 years, it doesn't feel like $100 million anymore. Because like the old saying, a dollar isn't what it used to be. Well, the same thing.
So, yeah, can I get your opinion? I mean, let's say whenever the mark of the beast comes in, you read in Revelation, people always freak out because it does say that without the mark, you can't buy or sell. Mm-hmm. So this is, we're talking about a one world government, a beast that controls the finances of the world. How do you see that working you've got all these currencies in the world. They all got different values and somebody's got to have the standard. So there's got to be a standard set that everything compares to. Okay. We call the dollar has been the standard for a while. I don't even know if we still are. The euro's worth more than the dollar. But so, I mean, how in the world, what will be the standard by which a world currency with all these different currencies, who's going to break that down? I mean, did they ever think that through?
Well, I think, and the euro is a great example of how something like this could happen. You had all those European nations who agreed to use one common currency. That experiment's been in play now. It worked. So really all you have to do from there is extrapolate it out to the rest of the world.
So do you think that this euro experiment, I think there's 28 nations in the European Union. So
yes.
Do you think that this euro experiment was really an experiment to prepare for the mark of the beast?
I do. I absolutely believe that.
Wow.
There was no reason to combine them to one currency. All they had to do was have trade agreements. They all still maintain their own currency.
So
they still have it. It's still in existence.
So who's
but
calling?
They have this additional this euro that they use as well, that they prefer.
Who's calling the shots? Is it the central bankers? Is it the International Monetary Fund? Is it the United Nations?
Central bankers, for me, are your original source of evil when it comes to monetary issues.
Well, how do you feel about the Fed? When we set up the Fed chair in 1913, I mean, how do you feel about that in America?
The Fed works with the central bank. They're almost one and the same.
So this system got started then. In other words, you're saying probably a little over 100 years ago. The world has been working on it's just in a gradual process to consolidate into this one world system. And there's been some tests going on. We went into the Federal Reserve in 1913. Central banking, I don't know when it started exactly. The euro started about 25 years ago maybe?
About 20 years ago, yes. And if you look and you'll see that you can tell things have been tried. We went off the gold standard and went on to the petrodollar, right?
Yep.
That was a way of controlling the Middle East, who didn't have central banks, by the way. After the petrodollar came about, we established central banks within with all of the Middle Eastern nations. So we have been programmed and trained to move towards a common currency because it's convenient for us. And it is convenient until you know where it leads.
Wow. And I guess, let me ask you about BRICS. I mean, that's Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South America or South Africa. Yes. They're called the BRIC nations. And I'm hearing rumors that they may be going to form a BRIC currency.
I have too, and it would make sense.
But how do we?
If you think about it, Let's extrapolate on one world currency, right? We have the European Union; they're all on one currency. America's on one currency. The Canadian dollar easily changeable with the U.S. dollar. Okay,
Right.
The Mexican peso, I think you'll see something happen in there. It's going to be a lot easier if you have the BRIC nations, the euros, and the American dollars as three currencies that control all of the trading in the world. Now, when you go to create one currency, it's a lot easier to get those three to combine than it is to get all the currency of the world to combine. It's just a much easier process.
So it's a process of elimination. It's dividing the world up into maybe three parts, and and then after you get it stabilized, you've already had the experiment with the euro, had a 20-year experiment, it worked. Now let's just divide the world up into three parts, the currencies into three directions. Once that stabilizes, then it will be a pretty easy move to bring it into one.
Absolutely.
Well, if that's okay.
If you look too, you look at that inflation that we talked about. The only reason inflation is good for a country, if you're looking in a long-term game, is that you eventually make that currency worth nothing, right? So if your goal is to create one currency later on, if you have every nation's currency slowly devaluing over the course of time, by the time 100 years gets in like we have now, the dollar doesn't do anything. People don't have much reverence for a dollar bill anymore. It doesn't really get you anything. So making a transition then is just so much easier because we've learned to not think of it having that much value per se.
Do you think these cryptocurrencies are trying to undermine that process? They're trying to avoid regulation by governments and trying to operate outside the system. Do you think that's going to last long term, or is it going to get crushed?
It's so hard to say. I think it has the ability to last long term. The only issue you have is that you have to be, and I'm thinking worst case scenarios, you have to have access to a computer and a program of some sort, so electricity and some form of internet connection to be able to use those cryptocurrencies effectively as a currency.
Which takes you back so in other words, you're back to precious metals as, again, another tangible asset that when push comes to shove at the end of the day, precious metals are still a tangible value.
Correct. Something that you can hold in your hand. If, when the mark of the beast comes, and those of us who refuse to take it, if we're still not here, depending on when we get taken home, and we need to buy something, we're going to have physically something in our hands that we can trade with other believers.
And I think that's what a lot of people don't realize, that the believers are going to work together. I love the way you said that, because as things get more and more intense, as the persecution starts to rise, I mean, we already see persecution of Christians around the world, the Middle East, and the Asian nations like China and North Korea and Pakistan, India, and then, of course, all of the Middle East. And we've seen it in communist nations for years. America's under a soft persecution. Canada's under a soft persecution. But when the rubber meets the road and folks don't realize that Christians can't even get jobs. Let's say, well, I'm not even going to say mark of the beast yet. Let's just say you just apply and they do a profile on you and they quickly, instead of doing a background check to see if you got a criminal record, they'll find out what faith you are quickly. They're watching the Facebook pages. They're gathering information. They know who you are, Charles. They know that you believe, okay? And all of a sudden, we're getting pushed out of the market. We're getting shoved out of the workplace. Christians are going to have a way to be able to barter, to work with one another, to help each other through this in some kind of a process. And you may be onto something here that the tangibility of precious metals might be very important.
Well, and that's why it's been of value for 5,000 years. It's tangible, it's portable, it's recognized no matter what the scenario is.
Now, folks, there is a day coming when they will throw the gold and silver in the street and say, what good is it? But that is not, I don't think we're here then, okay? I don't know when we leave, but I'll just say this. When it gets to the point that there's no hope left, Well, we're not the ones of the no hope, okay? So at some point, okay, we're leaving. I wouldn't want to be with that crowd during the wrath of God when it doesn't matter. I mean, that's bad.
That's true. And they can have my gold and silver at that point. I'll be where I need to be.
I'll leave it behind. Gold will be the cheapest thing in heaven, folks. Cheapest thing. We'll be walking on it, all right? All right, Charles, hey, I tell you what, let me tell them again, your website. Tell them about the products you have, phone number, and how they can get a hold of you.
Yeah, website's noblegoldinvestments.com. Great information there. Obviously, go there. If you have questions, get a hold of us, 877-596-7916. Give us a call. Have a team here that will answer your questions. It's important. If you have a question, call and find out. Don't guess or don't assume that you don't know and then say, I don't understand it. What? Give us a call. Find out. Make an educated choice. Give us a call. We'll answer your questions. If it's right for you, we'll show you how to do it. If it's not, have a blessed day. It's fine with us. We're not a pressure organization. So don't be intimidated to call. I know a lot of people don't like to call because they feel like they're going to get somebody on the phone who's going to hammer them. We're not that company.
And, I appreciate you saying that because, again, that's such an important part because I think sometimes people do feel a little intimidated. When it comes to these areas, especially if you're thinking about your 401k, you're thinking about your retirement, you're thinking maybe about your inheritance, don't know what to do. You just came into an inheritance or you just sold property. You don't know really what to do. Where should the money, where should you put it? What's the safest route? You got the stock market, you got the bank, and you got the precious metals. That's really the three options. And so you just let people call Charles at Noble Gold and let him give you good advice. And they will give you good advice, honest advice, a Christian company. They support our ministry, and they're just really good people. And I appreciate that you're saying that, Charles.
Well, that's who we are. And I think when we found this company, that was one of the most important things. Having been in this industry for so long and seeing what happens at other places, we knew that the customer needs to come first. Give them good, honest advice, live up to your faith, and people will come. Business will happen because people respect that. So give us a call and you'll see it firsthand.
See, that's awesome. I mean, what else can you say? Be good. Be true to your faith. Be true to the Lord. My mama taught me, okay, Charles, my mama taught me. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. The golden rule from the Bible, it still comes into play, folks. You got to have folks you can trust and you can talk to and know that they have your best interests at heart while providing you a service. Charles, thank you so much for being with us today. This was a very, very interesting discussion to get into the mark of the beast with you and hear your concept of it and information, and also about all these currencies and how they all work. I think this is very fascinating. So I appreciate you coming on to be with us today.
My pleasure, as always.
God bless. Folks, check it out. Again, Charles at Noble Gold. There's the website. It's right on the screen. Give them a call, and may God bless each and every one of you. God bless.